In a world where wealth and power often blind the heart, sometimes, it's the most unexpected hands that bring true salvation. Tonight's story will take you on an emotional journey that you won't forget. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that now so you don't miss a single part of this story. Now, let's dive in. The winter wind howled through the alleyways beneath Lower Wacker Drive, carrying the sharp scent of the Chicago River and the faint exhaust of passing cars. Peter Williams, age 16, tugged his threadbare jacket tighter around his shoulders, scanning the dark, slick concrete for anything of value. Beside him, his younger brother Paul, age 12, clutched a half-empty thermos of soup, the steam curling against his pale, chapped cheeks. Life had been unrelenting ever since their grandmother died 8 months ago, leaving them to navigate the streets alone. Bottles, odd jobs, scraps of food, these were their lifelines, their invisible existence hidden beneath the city's chaos. Peter kept a watchful eye on Paul, his mind constantly calculating the risks of every shadow. "Move fast," he whispered, voice low. "The cops are hitting this area more lately. We can't get caught." Paul nodded, trying to suppress his cough, but the thin soup had barely touched the gnawing hunger in his stomach. Still, he smiled faintly at Peter, trying to lighten the moment. "We'll be okay, right?" Meanwhile, several blocks above, in the sleek high-rise offices of Richardson Technologies, Andrew Richardson sat alone in his corner office, staring blankly at the framed photograph of his late wife, Sarah. 6 months had passed since cancer claimed her, and the world felt hollow without her laughter. His mind, already tormented by grief, compounded the fear he could no longer ignore. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the rare heart condition that had haunted his family for generations. Doctors had warned him, without a transplant, he had 12 months at most, but Andrew refused treatment. What was the point of living, he thought, when life felt so empty? Night fell fully over the city, slick streets reflecting the harsh glow of streetlights. Andrew insisted on driving himself home, rejecting his driver's offer with a curt shake of his head. He left the office, sleek black sedan gliding through the nearly deserted downtown streets. But the cold air stung, and a sudden chest pain gripped him. Dizziness swirled, heart racing violently. Panic overtook reason. Lower Wacker Drive loomed ahead, dark and isolated, the concrete barriers rising like walls. Andrew's vision blurred, his hands trembling on the wheel. He tried to steer, but the world tipped, lights and shadows merging in a dizzying whirl. Then, with a violent jolt, his car slammed into the barrier, metal screeching against concrete. Glass shattered, alarms screamed, and the city's quiet night shattered with the crash. From the shadows below, Peter and Paul froze at the sudden noise. Peter's instincts kicked in first. "That sounded bad," he muttered, grabbing Paul's arm. They ran toward the sound, hearts pounding. In the distance, through the darkness and steam rising from the river grates, they saw the crumpled sedan and a man slumped inside. The first instinct, fear, war with their innate courage. They knew they couldn't just walk away. Tonight, 2 boys who had nothing would face a moment that would change not just their lives, but the life of a man whose wealth had never taught him the meaning of love. And so, beneath the harsh winter sky, their paths collided with destiny. The sound of twisting metal and shattering glass echoed through Lower Wacker Drive, bouncing off the cold concrete walls. Peter felt his heart leap into his throat. He grabbed Paul, pulling him closer, as the acrid smell of smoke drifted toward their hiding spot. "That's a car crash," Peter said, his voice sharp with urgency. Paul's wide eyes reflected the faint glow of the wreck up ahead. "Should we?" Paul hesitated, his hands trembling against the dented thermos he still clutched. "We can't just stand here," Peter replied. His protective instincts overpowered his fear. The boys sprinted toward the sound, their worn-out sneakers slapping against wet pavement. At the end of the drive, they saw it, a sleek black sedan. It had crumpled against the barrier. Steam hissed from the engine. Inside, slumped over the wheel, was a man in a blood-streaked suit. His head leaned dangerously against the airbag, chest rising shallowly. Peter's heart raced. He yanked the door handle, grunting as it finally gave way. "Paul, help me." Paul peered inside, gasping at the sight of blood trickling from the man's forehead. "He's alive." Peter pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. A faint pulse. Relief flooded him. Yeah, but weak. We need to keep him awake. He tore a strip from his already frayed shirt and pressed it against the wound. The man stirred faintly, his lips parting. A hoarse whisper escaped. Help? You're going to be okay, Peter said firmly, his voice steadier than he felt. Stay with me, all right? Don't close your eyes. Paul looked around desperately. But we don't have a phone. His voice cracked with panic. Then get help. Run to the street. Stop someone, anyone. Paul hesitated for only a second before darting off, his thin frame disappearing into the shadows. Peter stayed, leaning over the man. Come on, old guy, you can't quit on me now, he muttered, applying more pressure. Moments later, Paul returned with a startled driver who had pulled over after hearing the crash. The stranger quickly called 911, his voice urgent as he gave the location. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Red and blue lights soon flooded the underpass as paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. Peter stepped back reluctantly as they took over, attaching wires, lifting the man carefully. But in those fleeting moments, the man's eyes cracked open again. Groggy, unfocused, they landed on the boys. He saw Paul's tear-streaked face, Peter's steady hand still stained with his blood. For an instant, recognition flickered, not of who they were, but of what they had done. Then he was gone, whisked into the back of the ambulance. Police swarmed the scene, their questions sharp and probing. But the boys exchanged a glance, the same unspoken fear passing between them. The system, foster homes, separation. They couldn't risk it. While the officers were distracted, Peter tugged Paul's sleeve. Come on. Together. They slipped into the shadows, disappearing back into the maze of Lower Wacker Drive. That night, Andrew Richardson's life was saved by two boys the world had forgotten. And though he didn't yet know their names, he would never forget their faces. Andrew Richardson stared at the white hospital ceiling, his body still weak from surgery. Machines hummed softly around him, but his thoughts weren't on recovery. They were on the two boys. In flashes, he remembered them, one with sharp, steady eyes, the other trembling, tears streaking down his young face. They weren't just images, they were anchors. In the split second between life and death, their presence had pulled him back. For the first time since Sarah's death, Andrew felt something stir inside him, the desire to live. He owed his life not to wealth, not to doctors, but to two boys who had nothing. He needed to find them. Within a week of being discharged, Andrew started his search. Security footage from nearby businesses showed shadows of the crash scene, but never clear faces. He hired a private investigator, but even with resources, the boys remained invisible, ghosts slipping through the cracks of Chicago. So Andrew did what he hadn't done in years. He walked the city streets himself. Every evening he returned to Lower Wacker Drive, his breath misting the cold air as he stopped strangers, asked questions, scanned alleys. Have you seen them? Two boys, young, maybe teenagers. Black, thin, one taller, the other coughing. Most people shook their heads. Some didn't bother to answer at all. Still, Andrew persisted. Each night, he left offerings, food, blankets, even small notes tucked into corners, hoping word might reach them. Something inside him refused to let go. Meanwhile, Peter and Paul were paying a heavy price for their act of courage. Peter's torn, bloody shirt had been left behind at the crash, and he feared police could trace it. We have to move, he told Paul, tugging him away from their usual sleeping spot. They began wandering from block to block, never staying long, always looking over their shoulders. But winter was merciless. The Chicago wind sliced through their thin jackets, and Paul's cough was worsening. At night, Peter lay awake, listening to his brother's ragged breathing. He wrapped his own coat around Paul, silently praying it would be enough. 2 weeks passed. One freezing afternoon, Andrew walked the river's edge, hands deep in his coat pockets. He had almost convinced himself the boys were lost forever, until he saw them. Peter was crouched by the water, washing a dented canteen, while Paul sat nearby, shivering beneath a torn blanket. Andrew's heart skipped. He knew that face, the older brother's eyes, steady and protective, exactly as he remembered. Summoning his courage, Andrew approached slowly. His voice trembled, not from the cold, but from emotion. "It's you," he said softly. Peter stiffened, instantly on guard. Paul blinked up at the tall man, confused. "I'm alive because of you," Andrew continued, his eyes glistening. "You saved me. I've been searching for you every day since that night." For a long moment, silence hung heavy. Then Paul's lips parted in shock. "You made it?" Andrew nodded, a weak but genuine smile spreading across his face. "Thanks to you." In that moment, under the harsh winter sky, 3 broken lives began to knit together. Andrew kept his promise to himself. He didn't let the boys slip away again. The very next morning, he returned to the riverbank with a bag of food and 2 thick blankets folded neatly under his arm. At first, Peter stood stiff and suspicious, ready to pull Paul away at the slightest hint of danger. But when Andrew held out the bag, sandwiches, bottled water, and a thermos of hot cocoa, Paul's eyes lit up. Hunger had a way of softening walls. Day by day, Andrew returned. Sometimes he brought gloves, sometimes medicine for Paul's cough, other times simply his presence. "You don't owe me anything," he told him quietly. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to be your friend." Peter narrowed his eyes. "Why?" Andrew hesitated. Revealing his true identity would only push them further away. "Because once someone did the same for me," he lied gently, "and I never forgot it." Over time, their conversations grew longer. Around a small fire built from scavenged wood, the boys shared their story. Their parents had died in a car crash when Paul was 6, leaving their grandmother to raise them. She had done her best with her meager pension, but when diabetes worsened, she couldn't afford the medication she needed. 8 months ago, she slipped away in her sleep. With no one left to fight for them, Peter and Paul slipped through the cracks of the system. Paul's voice cracked as he spoke, but he tried to smile anyway. "She used to hum gospel songs at night, so we wouldn't feel scared. Sometimes I still hear her." Andrew's throat tightened. He thought of Sarah, the way she had filled their home with music, laughter, warmth. He swallowed hard, the ache in his chest not entirely from his condition. "I lost someone too," he said softly. "My wife, Sarah. She was everything." For the first time in months, Andrew spoke of Sarah loud. Her quick wit, her kindness, the way she believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. Peter and Paul listened quietly, and in their silence, Andrew found comfort. Grief, he realized, recognized itself. Yet even as he opened his heart, Andrew kept one truth hidden: the weakness in his chest, the diagnosis that haunted every breath. Twice during their talks, Paul caught him pressing a hand to his sternum, his face briefly tightening in pain. "You okay?" the boy asked once, his voice gentle. Andrew forced a smile. "Just old bones." Paul frowned but didn't press further. As winter deepened, danger grew closer. Police patrols began sweeping underpasses, scattering encampments. One bitter night, Peter paced anxiously while Paul's cough rattled in the dark. "We can't stay here much longer," Peter whispered, eyes darting toward the distant wail of sirens. "If they catch us, we're done. Maybe we should head to another city." Paul shivered under his blanket. "But what about Andrew? He'll come looking." Peter's jaw clenched, torn between survival and the fragile bond they had begun to build. Snowflakes drifted silently down, and with them came the weight of choices no teenager should ever have to make. The cold had grown merciless, gnawing at their bones like a living thing. Paul's cough, once a nuisance, had become frightening, a deep, rattling sound that shook his small frame. His skin burned with fever, and every step left him gasping for breath. Peter hovered over him, torn between panic and determination. "Hold on, Paul," he whispered, pressing his hand against his brother's damp forehead. "Just hold on." But Peter knew the truth. This was more than a cough. His brother's lungs sounded heavy, his eyes glassy. Pneumonia. He had heard the word before, and he knew what it meant if left untreated. He wanted to run to the hospital, to beg for help, but fear chained him. Without insurance or a guardian, they could be taken by social services. He couldn't lose Paul, not after everything they had survived. That night, fate intervened. Andrew found them huddled near a steam grate, Paul shivering violently under a thin blanket. The sight struck Andrew like a blow. "Dear God," he breathed, dropping to his knees beside the boy. Paul's labored breaths made his chest tighten, not only from sorrow but from the reminder of his own fragile heart. "Stay back," Peter snapped, shielding his brother. "No," Andrew said firmly, his voice trembling. "He needs a hospital. Now." Without waiting for permission, Andrew pulled out his phone and barked instructions to his driver. Minutes later, Paul was bundled into the back of a sleek black SUV, Peter clutching his hand the entire ride. At Northwestern Memorial, Andrew's connection swung open doors that were usually closed. Paul was rushed into the VIP wing, surrounded by doctors and nurses who worked swiftly to stabilize him. Oxygen hissed, monitors beeped, and Peter stood frozen, terrified yet relieved. Then the whispers began. "That's Andrew Richardson," one nurse said. "The billionaire who almost died last month." Recognition spread among the staff, and suddenly the truth unraveled. Peter's eyes snapped to Andrew, his face hardening. "You lied," he hissed, pulling back from the man who had brought them here. "All this time, you pretended you were just some businessman. Do you think we're a charity case to you? Some kind of project?" His cheeks burned with humiliation. Their hunger, their poverty, paraded now in front of a man who could buy anything. Andrew's gaze dropped, shame washing over him. He didn't deny it. Instead, he sat heavily in a chair, rubbing his chest as if the weight inside had grown unbearable. "You're right," he whispered. "I should have told you. But I was afraid if you knew who I was, you'd never trust me." Peter said nothing, his jaw clenched. At last, Andrew raised his eyes, and for the first time, he revealed the secret he had guarded. "I'm dying," he said softly. "Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Without a transplant, I don't have long. The night of the crash. I didn't think I wanted to live anymore. But you gave me a reason. You didn't just save my life that night. You made me want to fight for it again." His voice cracked, unguarded and raw. "Wealth couldn't do that. Medicine couldn't do that. Only love could, and you showed me what it means." In the quiet hum of the hospital room, the billionaire and the homeless boy sat together, bound not by money, but by the fragile, unshakable truth of survival and love. The hum of hospital machines echoed faintly in the quiet room. Paul, now recovering steadily, dozed off in his bed, while Peter sat stiffly in the chair beside him. Across from them, Andrew leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly as though holding on to courage he wasn't sure he had. His face, usually composed, carried the weariness of a man who had run out of time. "Peter," he began carefully, his voice softer than usual, "I need to ask you both for something. Something I can't ask of anyone else." Peter's eyes narrowed, protective instinct flashing. "What do you mean?" Andrew took a slow breath. "I have no family left. No one. My surgery is scheduled in 2 weeks. But I can't even sign the paperwork unless I have emergency contacts. People I trust. I want that to be you too." His voice trembled as he added, "And I don't want to stop there. I want to become your legal guardian. To give you the home and the future you deserve." Silence filled the room. Peter's jaw tightened, suspicion brimming in his stare. "Why us? You could hire someone. Anyone. You're a billionaire." Andrew met his gaze steadily, pain but also hope flickering in his eyes. "Because you already gave me something no money could buy. When you pulled me out of that car, you didn't know who I was. You had nothing, and you gave me everything. That's family. I want to be that for you too." Paul stirred, his thin frame turning under the blanket. His eyes fluttered open, catching the emotion thick in Andrew's voice. "Peter," he whispered hoarsely, I think he means it." The boy's innocence pierced through his brother's hardened armor. For the first time in months, Peter faltered. He looked at Paul, pale but alive, because of Andrew, and he realized this man, for all his money and power, was as desperate for family as they were. 2 weeks later, the hospital became a place of suspended breath. Andrew lay on the operating table, a fragile figure beneath the glare of surgical lights. The heart transplant was dangerous. The doctors had warned, with no guarantees. In the waiting room, Peter paced relentlessly, fists clenched, while Paul bowed his head in prayer. He hadn't prayed since their grandmother's death, But tonight he whispered broken words to the heavens. Please don't take him too. Not him. Hours stretched like days. Twice, doctors rushed past with grim urgency, murmuring about complications. Peter felt his chest tighten, but he refused to cry. He had to stay strong for Paul. Finally, as dawn painted Chicago's sky with faint light, the surgeon emerged. His tired smile told him everything before he spoke. He made it. Relief hit like a tidal wave. Peter slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands, while Paul's thin shoulders shook with quiet sobs. They had nearly lost him, but Andrew had survived. When Andrew awoke days later, weak but alive, he found the boys at his bedside. Peter had finally let go of suspicion, resting in a chair, his hand loosely gripping Andrew's. Paul sat close, a faint smile on his face. In that fragile moment, they were no longer a billionaire and two homeless boys. They were family. A year can change everything. The sharp winds of Chicago still howled through Lower Wacker Drive, carrying the same scent of the river and damp concrete. But this time, Peter and Paul weren't crouched in the shadows, scavenging for scraps. They returned with purpose, not desperation. Andrew Richardson walked between them, his steps slower than before, but strong, each one a quiet miracle. The faint scar along his chest was hidden beneath his tailored coat, but he wore it proudly, not as a reminder of weakness, but as a symbol of survival. Feels different being back here, doesn't it? Andrew murmured, his gaze sweeping across the familiar concrete walls. Peter, now 17 and broader in his shoulders, nodded. He had traded the wary eyes of a street survivor for the focused determination of a young man with a future. It feels like a lifetime ago. Beside him, Paul adjusted the strap of his school bag, the emblem of his new private academy stitched neatly across the front. His face glowed with the hope of someone who finally believed in tomorrow. It feels like home and not home, he said softly. Like this place is where it all began, but not where it ends. Andrew smiled at the wisdom in his words. A year ago, he had been ready to let his broken heart end his story. Instead, two boys with nothing had given him everything. Now, the three of them returned not as victims of circumstance, but as agents of change. Behind them, a small team from the Sarah Richardson Foundation unloaded boxes of hot meals, blankets, and medical kits. The foundation, born in Sarah's memory but shaped by Peter and Paul's courage, had already lifted hundreds of homeless youth off the streets. Peter joined the volunteers, handing out supplies, his voice steady and sure as he spoke to kids not much younger than himself. Andrew watched with quiet pride. Peter was already taking business courses at a top university, preparing to one day co-lead the foundation. Paul, meanwhile, knelt beside a coughing boy, offering him soup and whispering encouragement. His own battle with pneumonia had left a permanent tenderness in his heart. Teachers at his new school marveled at his brilliance, but Andrew knew his true gift was something deeper, the ability to see people's pain and bring them comfort. As the night deepened, the three of them stood together where it had all begun. The stretch of road where Andrew's car had crashed, where glass and blood once stained the pavement. Andrew placed a hand on each of the boys' shoulders. His voice carried both gratitude and awe. If I hadn't nearly died here, I never would have truly lived. You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me a family. Peter met his eyes, no longer just the guarded boy he once was. And you gave us one too. Paul squeezed Andrew's hand, smiling to the glow of streetlights. Grandma always said love shows up when you least expect it. Guess she was right. The winter wind pressed cold against their faces, but none of them shivered. For the first time in a long time, all three felt only warmth. They had come full circle, not just surviving, but thriving together. What lesson did you learn from this story? Share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.